The following transmission is a conversation with ToxicWhiteout, lead developer of Long 15, a new quest and land mod for Fallout New Vegas focused on expanding upon the in-game location of the Long 15, the second in a set of mods aimed at deepening the story relationship of the NCR-controlled Long 15 and the Legion town of Drywells, made pivotal during the end of the Lonesome Roads DLC. Having begun modding at a young age, Whiteout's fascination with expanding and deepening the stories told across New Vegas have been front and center from the very beginning, with some of his earliest mods being expansions of the stories of the Legion, different raider factions, and the followers of the Apocalypse, a personal favorite of mine. Over the course of our conversation, we'll talk at length about the different methods of storytelling used by both modders and by Bethesda, the relevancy of world location and design when it comes to storytelling, and the living lore of the Fallout universe. I am follower Toshi, and this is the Atomcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow for future episodes, and consider subscribing to our Patreon for early access to new uploads, to help keep episodes ad-free, and to improve the quality and frequency of transmission. As always, links to our Patreon, as well as guest socials, can be found in the description. And be sure to leave a comment recommending creators that you'd like to see as future guests. Without further ado, ToxicWhiteout. So one of the running jokes that I have is sort of I bring a guest on, and not always start off, but one of the things that I sort of try to squeeze in sometimes is is this joke question that I pitch to them. I'm all right, so as somebody in the Fallout space, I am contractually obligated to ask you, what is your favorite Fallout game? And keep in mind, there is a right answer. Given the body of your work so far, I would be fairly safe in assuming that it's New Vegas, but it is always interesting, especially as somebody who specifically makes mods for the game, to hear, your background, your experience with Fallout, and sort of where you came into the IP. Because my first Fallout game was Fallout 3, and I would probably still say that maybe New Vegas or Fallout 4 are my favorite one. But then, everybody's got sort of different interpretation and taste and stuff. So for you, what was your first game? What was your introduction to the series or the franchise? And how has your journey shaped from then to where you are now?
That's a really good question. Trying to think back to when I first started, I want to say it was maybe 2012. Something like that. My family was moving back and forth. We're both West Coasters, so I was moving from California to Washington and back.
Yeah, Passover, Oregon. We don't want either of you. for
the audience, from the good one to the other good one.
Yeah, exactly. For the audience, that's sort of a coastal joke. We all just hate each other, but the one thing we have in common is we fucking hate Iowa or Idaho even more. God damn it.
Okay, so I'm trying to think back. So, so we're moving back and forth, and I just had a lot of free time on my hands. It was during the summer, and I'd been playing all these different games on my 360. And at one point, I was I kept seeing this, post-apocalyptic game Fallout, and then I would watch YouTube videos of it, and I was like, man, the gunplay doesn't look that good, because I was used to Call of Duty type of games, Borderlands, things like that. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. So I started with New Vegas. I had heard it was kind of buggy, but I was like, I'm going to give it a go. I didn't actually enjoy it the first time I played it because I just thought it was really slow. And then gave it another go maybe 5 or 6 months later after having it sit on the shelf, and just totally fell in love with it. I thought it was so deep and rich, and just the idea of making a choice, in a quest, and then seeing that choice reappear somewhere completely that I thought was completely unrelated hours later, sometimes hours after I had, forgotten I even made the choice in the first place. Um, I thought I was like, this is going to be my favorite game. Like, I'm going to pour so many hours into this. So, went all through New Vegas, finished it, felt like I needed more, went and played Fallout 3, which maybe this is a hot take too, but at the time, I enjoyed it just as much as New Vegas the first time I played it. I loved it. I loved the atmosphere, the exploration, the way the world felt. I just loved it. I think as I've gotten older, I appreciated New Vegas a little more just because of the fact that they leaned heavily into the like post apocalypse, where all the factions are building back up. But um, I love them both. I have a deep love for both games. Um, and Journey from then, um, I actually lived in Idaho for about a year and a half. And while I was there, it's funny you mentioned that we had almost no internet. The internet was just like unserviceable. We were like out in the mountains. And so I was like, well, I can only play offline games and I might as well like learn, how to mod and make stuff myself. So I just started making mods that I would want to play. So um, yeah, just kind of went from there, and then from that point, took a big break after Fallout 4, and then came back. I think pretty close to season 1 of the show coming out. It brought me back into Fallout and just kind of reignited my love for the series.
One of the things that I sort of like, because like normally that question specifically, like, what brought you into the series is sort of like a trick question, not in the sense that it has any sort of like right or wrong answer. Because for a question like that, there isn't really a wrong answer. It's more so like getting a perspective of what specifically brought you into the IP. Because with any game or any story, specifically games, because I feel like because of the interactivity of video games, there's more so than just the story that pulls people in. And especially with RPG games like Fallout and, more so recently, like, Baldur's Gate, and then like the Divinity series. And then, even games that technically aren't really like RPG games, but have like RPG elements, like like Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption. There's sort of like two dividing things that tend to bring people in. It's either the story and or like, the atmosphere and the environment, anything that basically like helps to tell the story of the world or like the main characters and stuff like that. And then there's the gameplay side of it, to where like this pulled me in because of like the way that you can interact with the environment, the like shooting mechanics, the puzzle solving aspect of it. One of the things that brought me into the Hitman franchise, for example, because like, I mean, everybody's like a fan of like multiple different kinds of games. I'm a big fan of the Hitman game. And one of the things that brought me more into that game, or that series specifically, was just the way that you could interact with the world and sort of like the openness to solve the quote unquote problem, for lack of bringing up more interesting words to describe that series. The way that you were able to like the openness of it. And for RPG games specifically, getting back into Fallout New Vegas, it's interesting to hear that the thing that specifically pulled you in was the interactivity and the responsiveness of the RPG systems, because especially for somebody like you, I think that's really telling as to what you would eventually go on to do. Which for anybody who knows who you are going into this podcast is modding. And I think that's really interesting. So from where you sort of started to where you are now, if you have, at like great academic length, what has been your, maybe not experience, but sort of your evolutionary understanding of the way video game systems and mechanics work when it comes to, branching dialogue, choices,
Mhm.
impact, that sort of thing. In not only your works, but also, just as like a general sort of like academic study kind of thing, quote unquote.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot that I could talk about on this, because it's a really deep, like, subject. I think the most important thing that I would say modding has helped me, kind of realize for games is there to me, there's 2 types of games. I mean, there's probably more, but if you go to a very simplified level, you have games that are essentially, you're on a treadmill, right? Like you're being pushed in one direction. You can fight against it, but it's going to push you in one direction. I guess an escalator might be a better example. You're
like
gonna
like
go down this
linear
path.
like
Yeah,
linear games.
linear. Right. Yeah. So they have a story that they want to tell. And I think those games are great. And, you can tell a really compelling, interesting story. And to me, that reads almost like a movie or something. But then you have, I think the next level is it's more like a spider web. So you've got all these different branching paths, and sometimes they interlock with each other. They can weave together. Sometimes, cutting one strand will make another one fall, things like that. So that is, in my perspective, a hallmark of a really, really well made game. For example, like you said, Baldur's Gate,
Can you give us an
perfect
example
example.
of like what games would fall into those two categories, or like what you would consider like good representations of both of those categories, ones that go on a more linear path and ones that sort of like branch
Mhm.
out a bit more?
Yeah, totally. I think like Grand Theft Auto is a good example. It's a long story. It's a very interesting story. It's very fun, and you have this, open world and all this freedom. But when you go back into the game, you're experiencing, essentially the same mission. I know there's some aspects where you can make choices, but for the most part, you're following a set of pre-made stories, that are down one path. And then on the other hand, you have something like Baldur's Gate. So I'll give you an example in Act 2, very light spoilers. Um, I made a mistake and I didn't act quickly enough, and then every single character in this like light in or last light in or something, they all died, in like all of them. And I didn't even know that was something that could happen. And I was just completely locked out of maybe 6 to 8 hours of content because of a decision I made on my first playthrough. And that was my light bulb moment of like, holy shit, man, this is a really well made game. This is really well crafted because I made a mistake and the developers were not scared to cut me off from a lot of content, as even though they knew it might negatively impact my perception of their story, because they wanted me to have a reaction to my choices. They wanted there to be a consequence for me messing up. And I think that's something that's so important in game development, specifically to RPGs, that yeah, man, that's like really opened my eyes to what, in my opinion, makes a really good story-rich, RPG, in terms of game development.
Do you think that this is something specifically that is more intrinsically tied to like story design, or do you think it's something that can be attributed to also like gameplay or world design?
Yeah, I think it can be both, but definitely, I think, yeah, mostly story. I think if you're going to try and tell a story, and you're going to create different paths, you have to do that first. So I think like laying out all the different paths and all the options, it can start getting a little bit convoluted very quickly. So you do have to like snip off the ends. So, you can add a lot of choices with gameplay. And when I think of that, I think of like, okay, can you finish our game without killing anyone? Can you, sneak through all the levels? Can you, go murder hobo and wipe out this whole town and still complete the main story? Those are not really story based decisions. Those are gameplay based decisions. So I think it can be gameplay, but I think the most compelling ones for me are when I'll make a decision and then I go, whoa, the developer knew I could do that, or they like attributed. They thought someone might make that choice. Um, I just think that's so cool, and that's what we've been trying to do with our mods. But man, it certainly makes game development harder. So I think that's why I appreciate it so much when it's in an RPG.
Since you've gotten to Act 2 of Baldur's Gate, you probably know exactly which section I'm talking about here.
Mhm.
It's during Act 1, if I remember correctly. And I only know this because, like, after Baldur's Gate 3 dropped, it was one of those, like, TikTok videos where, like, oh my gosh, I could do this, and nobody knew that you could, like, do this. But, like, it's been a while since I've played Baldur's Gate 3, so I'm a little fuzzy on it. But
Mhm.
there's one part when you're in, oh gosh, I can't remember it, but like that one like dungeon area where there's a bunch of like, oh gosh, what like the deep gnomes are being like held hostage by like
Oh
like the evil
yeah.
yeah, I can't remember the name of the section and stuff, but at one point you go and you're like looking for, I think you were looking for blast powder specifically, or like a
Mhm.
missing keg of blast powder or something, and you find that one deep gnome, and she has the keg of blast powder, and she's all don't you do anything, like this is mine, I'm gonna do something crazy with it. And she's basically, it's basically like a situation where like like hand on the detonator, like don't like,
Mhm.
get away from me. But if you have a character that's good at stealth, you can have them actually like go around her, like, and then like reverse pickpocket the actually not reverse pickpocket, but just like steal the blast powder out of her pocket. And then
Yep.
when she actually like tries to hit the button, nothing happens. And
Yep.
it's interesting, it's unique for that game specifically because of the fact that you can sort of control your party's characters both
Mhm.
inside and outside of combat. So you can have like one character actually engaged in combat, and then if you have another character who was separate from the party when they engaged in combat, you can have
Mhm.
them freely roam about the world independent of you. Which as somebody who has played games like that, party based games, um, I think that was really, really cool. And it's probably not something
Yeah.
unique to Baldur's Gate 3 specifically, but like I just thought that was really awesome that you could have one character in one section of the map doing one section of the story, and then another character in a completely different section of the map doing a completely different section of the story. That's crazy. um,
Yeah, and it goes to show like I can't even imagine from a development perspective how you would create something like that where you're almost playing like two games at once, and one of them is turn based and the other one is like real time because you're not in combat. Like it just it's so unbelievable. That game is so incredible. I'm really glad it got the praise it deserves, and yeah, I hope it. I mean, we're still kind of seeing its effects, its ripple effects, but I think after all the praise it got, it is making the way for, other games with a lot of, depth and choices like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, things like that, to do really well where previously they might have flown under the radar because I think people want more of that and they really like that.
I've been a big fan of Larian's really interesting and unique design perspective when it comes to like
Mhm.
the kinds of games that they made. Prior to Baldur's Gate 3, one of their titles that I played, which I absolutely adored because it's the weirdest fucking combinations of like random ass gameplay mechanics that I've ever seen, and yet somehow it all works so beautifully. What is it?
Yeah.
It was Divinity Dragon Commander.
Mm.
Have you heard of that one?
I've heard of it, but I haven't played it. I haven't played any of the Divinity series, but I do plan on getting into them.
It's so weird because it doesn't seem like any of the mechanics should work together, and yet somehow they do. Let me see if I can remember all of the like core mechanics. There's real time strategy,
Hmm.
card a card system,
Yeah.
romance system, political decision system, which affects the real-time strategy aspect, and like it's so weird. It's such a like it's like these elements shouldn't work together, and then like there's like story-driven dialogue choices, companion or not companion relationship, well, kind of companion relationship. But like it tracks that, and then that also has an impact on the RTS. It's a really crazy game to look at from like a gameplay mechanics perspective, because again, it's like all these systems that shouldn't work together, and yet they do. And this game came out in like 2010, so maybe it was more of like a weird sort of like, oh my gosh, how is all this working together? Like it was probably a bigger deal back then, but like it's still like even today, it's really impressive how everything sort of combines and works together. So I would definitely recommend it. Prior to back on the topic of Fallout, but still on the topic of gameplay design, I sort of insinuated when we started our conversation before we actually started the interview that there wasn't going to be like any sort of like, hardball questions. But I want to pitch one at you because it's one that I myself have sort of like propagated, but I want to run it by you. And I'm really interested in your thought process, specifically because you're somebody who has, engaged with mods and worked on like the what is it? Come on, brain. On the like mechanical side of it, not just, writing a story, but also the design aspect of, quest building and how it works with the story, specifically around New Vegas. When I'm thinking about RPGs and specifically how they relate to the Fallout franchise, one of the things that constantly comes up for me is the idea of sandbox versus open world. And I think it seems like the two are sort of synonymous, but yet they are very different in the way they approach, or not approach, but in the way they're used in RPG games. When I look at specifically like New Vegas and Fallout 4, they're both, open world RPGs, et cetera, et cetera. And yet I feel as if New Vegas specifically is less so, but that specifically relates to the terminology of open world. If we look at, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, when you start the game, you basically start and then you can go anywhere. Right. You can go anywhere. You can go in any direction and just start doing, quest stuff and just like go crazy with it. When you start New Vegas, you can technically do the same thing, but the story is very laid out in a specific linear fashion. You can just immediately run north, dodge the Cazadors, dodge the Deathclaws, stuff like that, and get to Vegas like almost instantly. Which, fun fact, the first time my sister played New Vegas, that's exactly what she did. And somehow pulled it off. But normally the game starts in Good Springs, then probably takes you to like, Sloan, and then you head south and you go to the Prim, and then, on and on and on. You go through Novak and stuff like that. And the story is set up that way because the going through not Novak, Nipton. Going through Nipton is a very story specific thing. That's how you meet the Legion. That's how you're introduced to just how violent the Legion is. And then, from there and there, on and on, yada, yada, you meet the Brotherhood of Steel. You meet Veronica, and then she tells you about the Brotherhood and stuff like that. And it's a very, again, linear story progression. So the thing that I always bring up when posited this question, or not this question, but the thing that I always bring up is that I feel that New Vegas is less of an RPG game when you compare it to like Fallout 3 or Fallout 4, specifically because you're put on that linear path, but it's still a pretty open world RPG game. With that comparison in mind, what's the question here? I guess the question would be, how effective do you feel the approach to that idea of, like, you know, a reactive RPG game or a reactive RPG experience? Do you feel that the style that they went with in New Vegas is compared to, like, you know, the style, like just an open world style similar to what they do in, you know, Fallout 4, Starfield, you know, Oblivion, or not Oblivion. Well, I guess kind of Oblivion, but like Elder Scrolls, specifically Skyrim and stuff like that, you know, comparing the two, a more linear driven RPG versus a more like open RPG where you can just kind of like do anything.
Yeah, that's something that is a really good point, because when you really think about it, New Vegas does nudge you in a, you know, specific route. And like you said, there are routes you can take. You can go through Black Mountain and kind of circumvent it. There's ways to do it, but for the average player, you're probably going to go through Prim, Mojave Outpost, Nipton, you know, Novak. You know, you're going to do that U shape around the map and then work your way up to Vegas. Um, but I think one of the things that's great about New Vegas doing that is they nudge the player in a way that doesn't feel unnatural. So you've got these roadblocks in front of you, and it's technically possible to get past them, but it's extremely difficult until you're, you know, a high enough level. So when I compare, I like your comparison between Sandbox and open world RPG, because I would almost go a step further and say Fallout 3, Fallout 4, they feel kind of like sandboxes, because you're just like plopped in this world and you can take any direction and just start running that way. Um, versus New Vegas, they do have a story they want to tell you. However, I think where I think the story is stronger in New Vegas is because when you're interacting with the factions in New Vegas and you're making these choices, you see those same choices appear farther and farther along. So, for example, if you somehow miss Volpe's in Nipton, you'll have a different guy come up to you in, or if you kill him, a different guy will come up to you in the Strip. If you ignore him, they'll mention it. Like, the reactions, there are reactions later in the game based on what you did early on, versus in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and yeah, Elder Scrolls as well. You have this massive open world, you know, open to you, but the decisions you make with, you know, Arafu, or might be Arafu, whatever the pronunciation is, or the Republic of Dave in Fallout 3, those don't really have a lot of impact on the story itself. But you know, when I think of New Vegas, I think of like, well, if I'm going the NCR route, then I want to resolve the situation at Jacobstown a certain way. I want Novak to be set up a certain way, because it all ties into how I want this region to look. But with Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, I find that when I'm exploring the wasteland, especially with Fallout 4, and I start setting up the towns and I'm doing it myself and I'm having the Minutemen take over, I still feel like once I leave, a lot of this stuff is going to fall apart without me. Like, once I leave this town that I've spent so much time building up, um, you know, there's still going to be all these death claws patrolling around and all these things going on. But in New Vegas, if I establish this, you know, government based on my decisions, and I help Yes Man, for example, if I help Yes Man with all these different minor factions around the map, that all plays into making the region more and more and more stable. And then by the time I leave, it doesn't need me anymore. And it becomes this self sufficient organism almost. Like, it's fine on its own without me. So to me, that's the hallmark of a great RPG that is New Vegas. Whereas Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, yes, the map is more open. And, you know, in some ways there are more choices because you can go anywhere and do anything. I just wish that the choices you made in the smaller, you know, side quests had a bit more of tie-in with the story. And you know, that's a narrative choice. If they don't want it to do that, that's totally fine, you know. But that's just one thing that I would also say to consider.
And here's the follow up. to that specifically. One, I think that that's a really smart way of thinking about it, specifically with how you want to interact with the world. In, I believe it's Fallout 4. In Fallout 4, specifically the development side of it. Do you know what the player character is referred to on the development back end?
I'm not sure.
The player character is referred to as Atlas because basically the entire thing revolves around like them and their perspective, right? And
Okay.
it was more so from like, I think it was more so like a rendering sort of thing. Like if the player is in like this location, then like this other location doesn't need to be rendered in like as fine detail because they're not like here or whatever. But basically the world exists around them. And one of the interesting things that I've seen more so often, to like put a timeline on it, pre the release of Starfield is a call for Bethesda games to not focus so much around a character who's like the chosen one, right? If we go back to like Elder Scrolls Oblivion, which is topical since in 2024 we got, or 2025 rather, we got a, by the way, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
God, like
it's weird to talk about 2025 in the past tense.
Right. We're 48 hours into the new year. So like, you know, but if we look at Oblivion specifically, we're not playing as like, you know, the chosen, like the Dragonborn, like in Skyrim. We're playing as just a random person who just so happened to be in the right jail cell at the right time, and had, you know, destiny hoisted upon us. There's an argument that in Fallout New Vegas, you are also like, I guess maybe not like the chosen one, but like are somebody who had responsibility or like a manifest destiny, not a manifest destiny, but like a predetermined history sort of hoisted upon them. Especially when you consider like a lot of the DLC lore, with like your legendary status, with like the Divide and the choice of Hoover Dam and stuff like that. Which again, fantastic writing style. It's like when it's done correctly, mwah, chef's kiss, beautiful. The argument though, maybe not the argument, but the delineation is sort of a pull away from your character sort of being like, you know, oh, he walks in and like rights all the wrongs and like makes everything like perfect forever. And more so with relation to Fallout 4, I think it's interesting specifically what they did in that game, around like the settlement system, right? Because when you're talking about like, you know, you go into like, you know, Arafu or the Republic of Dave, and you know, you fix a problem in that area, but you haven't like set them on like the path to utopia or anything like that. I think it's interesting when I think of Fallout 4 specifically, because while that is sort of like the case in like specific like pre-built like locations, you do sort of have a larger effect on the way the Commonwealth is sort of like populated and present, because like you go around to these different locations and sort of build them up as like new settlements and stuff. It would have been nice if there was a little bit more like effect on the world that you see as a result of building these up. But I mean, that's a completely different conversation. I think that it's that specifically is interesting more so on like not as much a direct effect on the places that you visit, but more a direct effect on the actual environment of the location. So like, again, with the settlements, building up the world itself to be, you know, safer, more prosperous, more populated, especially when you can get like trade settlements going and like you see people actively or not people, but you can see like, you know, you'll like run into like your trade route actively trading, or like actively walking between different locations, sending your companion back. They actually have to walk back in real time, running into, random encounters like the roaming automatrons with the Automatron DLC. And
Mhm.
I think there's a question on the impact you have on sort of a narrative, a narrative aspect, and an actual like visual impact on the world
Yep.
itself.
Yep.
Which I think Bethesda games specifically lean more into like the narrative, because they're like more so focused on like sorry, not narrative, but like the world development.
Yeah.
Because they seem to be focused a lot more on environmental storytelling and things like that. But when it comes to that, a focus on change via the narrative or change via the world itself, which one of those do you see as probably not obviously not the better one? Because I mean they're both fantastic options when,
Mhm.
based
Mhm.
on what you're trying to accomplish. But which one do you see as the more fulfilling when it comes from, I guess, specifically given your experience and stuff, from a gameplay or from like a development perspective, which do you feel is the most rewarding for the player from a creation aspect?
Yeah. This is something that I've actually thought about really extensively. This is something we tried to do a lot with Long 15, and um, to a smaller scale did with Drywells as well. But um, just to go back a little bit, I would say that New Vegas and Fallout 4 are both missing one of these. So, for example, to your point, um, Fallout 4, you go in and the towns are already established, which is awesome. And that's why so many players really love that, because you go in and you don't have to build the town from scratch, it already exists. You can help them, but you can't do a lot of things like, create new trading posts for them, make more guards, beef up their defenses visually, where you walk in and the town has new walls and things like that. You can't do that with New Vegas. And I think that is a huge, you know, obviously they couldn't do everything, but
Yeah,
that is
the
a
game
huge
came
thing
out
that
in
feels,
2010. There was only so
yeah,
much they could do, and they only had 18 months. So, like,
right, right.
know,
But when I think about New Vegas, that's something I feel like is missing. That's something that's very lacking. So when I think of that, and you look at the most popular mods, you have the Living Desert is a perfect example of this, because that mod specifically adds a lot of that. So when you make certain decisions, you'll start seeing caravans go back and forth. You'll start seeing traders. You'll start seeing new types of people. Your decisions will have a visual effect on the world, which was missing. But with Fallout 4, I think it's the opposite problem. Um, so you can set up a settlement and you can build it up and you can have all these, things going on, but they're missing the ground floor. You kind of have like Diamond City, you have a couple other small settlements, but you just don't really have numbers of, a lot of different towns with unique named characters and things like that. And an argument could be made that I'm wrong, and I totally open to that. But in my opinion, New Vegas has a lot more depth right as you arrive when you're talking to all these characters. So to me, I think that is the most important thing. It's the foundational thing that Fallout 4 is missing, is that I need to be able to walk up to this town and already be interested and want to help them, rather than just be like, well, there's all these shacks and there's nothing here. So I'm going to build it up and settlers will start coming to me. I think that's great. And I think that is, taking it the next level, which I wish New Vegas had. But I think what was missing for me from Fallout 4 was that foundational, I arrive in town, there's, maybe 10 or 15 people here. They already have a pretty decent life, but I want to help them, you know, have something more. So when I'm thinking
yeah,
about a
like
narrative
solve a
standpoint,
problem, or like,
right.
yeah,
Sorry, I know it's been a bit of a tangent, but just to answer your question very quickly, I think it's a bit of both, but I think the narrative side is more important because you have to capture the player's attention first, and then you can flesh out the world after. But I do think both are very important.
So one of the things that we've been sort of like dancing around a little bit is just like the mods that you have put out. Most recently has been the Long 15, which has been received like incredibly well so far. You've mentioned it a couple times. There was a mod that you put out prior to this, which released in like late last year, and it was called Dry Wells. And it's I sort of think of it this way because they both have expansion in them. So it's like, it seems like this is like, like part of like a series. But you have a mod that came out prior to this called Dry Wells, a Legion expansion. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think one of the things that a lot of people are sort of more so focusing on is the Long 15, which, rightfully so. But it's interesting because it feels like it's part 2 of like an evolving story. So tell us more about like where this story began in Dry Wells.
Yeah. Appreciate you asking that one because I have noticed that, obviously I'm very happy for the success of Long 15, but I do think Dry Wells is also really interesting story. So when I was first thinking about creating this series, I was thinking about revamping these factions or expanding the world space, and you just already have these mods that are kind of doing that. You have Nova Arizona for the Legion, which is taking the player all the way to Arizona in the world map. You have different the Frontiers rework is trying to take you up to Oregon. You have all these different things going on already, so I didn't want to overlap with them. So I figured, what's something that you can already visit in the game that I could add another layer of choice to. So in Lonesome Road, you get to the very end of the DLC and you can nuke these 2 locations. You can nuke Dry Wells or you can nuke Long 15, or you can choose to not nuke either one. But I felt like it didn't really have the impact on me that I wanted it to. You're like literally sending a nuclear bomb off to this faraway place that you can't ever really see, and you're killing who knows how many people. But all you know is that you're hurting the Legion or you're hurting the NCR. So I was like, well, if we add these world spaces before they're nuked, it's going to create a lot more of an impact to the player if you actually pull that, you press that button. So that was the why. Now, Dry Wells was made first, and the reason why I did that is because when you enter the world space, the nuked one, you can clearly see these very clearly defined cliffs all around the little town. So I figured, well, this is definitely the smaller of the 2. So I'm going to see if I can flesh this world space out and write a compelling story. And all of Dry Wells was made in about 3 months. So worked on it probably 8 to 10 hours a day. Just it's funny. I woke up at like 2 in the morning and had this dream come to me of, what about this conflict where you have a really good person who is in a bad system. So you have this centurion Constantine, and he has a relatively decent moral compass. He's maybe not as capable or brutal as the other leaders, but he just kind of is going against the grain slightly in the Legion. And so when you arrive, he's in power, and he's just kind of holding the area down for Gaius Magnus, the true leader of Dry Wells, the true centurion who's on track to become a legate. Um, and when you arrive, you realize very quickly this Constantine guy, he's going to have a very short expiry date in the Legion because he just does not. He's not going to do well. So if the player actually does nothing, he's gone. That entire side of the story ends very, very early on, and I wanted that was an intentional choice because I wanted there to be an option where you could kind of help bring about, you know, bring change to some of the people who live in this area's lives in a positive way, but I didn't want it to happen without player intervention. Um, so that was my main thought process creating Drywells. I wanted to just create a new town, add more impact to the nuke, and show a different side to the Legion. So you can basically either go down this route of helping Constantine and kind of making a bit more of a peaceful, still oppressive, but a little bit less oppressive reality for the folks who are living there. Or you can go with Gaius Magnus, who's very much the, you know, run of the mill standard. This is your designated bad guy. Or you can not side with either of them and you can just kind of help the little tiny side factions that are surviving within this area. Um, and you can get all the way to the final battle and betray them both if that's what you want to do. So I just wanted to bring out, that same type of choice that you have in New Vegas, but on a much smaller scale. So I think Drywells does that pretty well.
It's interesting specifically that you maybe I'm reading maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it seems as if your big motivator for making both of these mods in this instance, because it's the one we're talking about right now, Drywells, is less so I have a unique story that I want to tell, or I want to examine a very specific part of this aspect of the lore, or create my own like concept of what this section of the world could look like, a la something like the Frontier or Fallout Cascadia or Miami or London or anything like that. But more so specifically, it all stems from a deepening of the relationship between the player and a specific location. Because like you said, in New Vegas, after you visit, after you go through the Lonesome Road DLC and you get to Ulysses and you have the option to nuke the Long 15 or Drywells, there isn't really a big connection to either of these locations because they're not places that you visited. And so in order to make that choice more impactful, you created those locations in order to be like, hey, this is what the impact, or like to add more weight to the choice. And I think that's really interesting because it shows a deeper, how would I describe it? It shows a bigger connection to wanting to have a relationship with the locations in the series, in the world, rather than specifically the stories or events that happen in them. Obviously, the stories and the events that take place in Drywells or in the Long 15 are going to, be reference points that you look back on when you make these decisions, when you get to the end of Lonesome Road. But again, it's not like, you hit the button or you get to that choice and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be worried about, like this guy back in Drywells or this soldier in the Long 15 that like, oh, I really like him. And like, oh, I'm concerned that I'm going to blow him up. It's like, no, you have a larger relationship with the place that you're actually affecting rather than a specific person or people's within that place, essentially. And I think that's really interesting because I think it sort of pulls into, I guess, the larger concept of Fallout as an IP. And I do want to hear more about the Long 15 specifically, not just Drywells, but I think it pulls into a larger idea that we in the Fallout community are more so interested in the locations in Fallout as opposed to, the people or the stories that take place in them. So like, obviously when you think of like New Vegas or, DC or the Commonwealth or anything, The interesting thing isn't so much, or even like, West Virginia and Appalachia and Fallout 76. The
Hmm.
interesting thing, obviously, is the stories that happen in them, but more so the reflection of how they've changed since, pre-war, and more so how they are sort of similar and yet different to their real world counterparts. And I just think, especially when there's like, theory crafting, or like, because everybody's all like, oh, where's Fallout 5 going to take place? Or where could the next Fallout
Yeah.
game take place? It's interesting because it's not so much like, what are the kinds of stories we could experience? It's like, where is the location
Where are
going to
we
be
going?
settled? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, where are we going to go? It's almost like the entire series is just like one long road trip, right?
Hmm.
One long 20-year-old road trip to like, the next destination. When it comes to the way that you craft stories, obviously, and I don't want to like, say definitively like, oh, you've only done 2 mods, so it's like, what do you know? But when it comes to like the way that you think about like story crafting and stuff, is it something that's more so driven based on location, or is it something that's driven based on like, this is the kind of story I want to tell? Obviously, one can come after the other, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
But for you, the first thing you think about, is it the place or is it the story?
That's really funny that you mentioned that, because we've all on our team been talking about where to go next. And that's such a funny thing that I don't think we've even had that realization that um, we very much do go, we do go, okay, where are we going next? Okay, and then what story can we tell within that setting? And you're right that Fallout fans also do that, because I've been hearing a lot about, let's do Fallout Texas, let's do Fallout in the Pacific Northwest, let's do Fallout in New Orleans,
Right?
and
Because it's
not
like,
about
it's not like they're making like a specific story they want to tell and then
right.
making that fit to the location. They're looking
Yeah,
at the location and then figuring out what kinds of stories could happen there.
yeah,
It's
and that
really
is
interesting.
yeah, and it's weird because that is so backwards from a lot of other aspects of fantasy. I could say Elder Scrolls maybe has a bit of that, but I think part of the reason for that is because Fallout is uniquely in essentially a real life setting. So we want to see real life things reflected, or real life locations reflected in Fallout, which is so crazy because you think about something like, okay, like Fable, for example. You don't really think about, well, what city is Fable, the next Fable game going to take place in? You think about, I want to be able to go into some, any city and do this, or go have an adventure in the woods somewhere or something like that. But for Fallout, it's more like, well, I want to see, you know, New Mexico, or I want to see Texas. That's really crazy to think about that. I've actually never had that realization that place totally does come first. So yeah, to answer your question, the location does come first, but I do think what is in there is equally important. It just comes later.
Yeah,
So, you
obviously.
know, yeah. So wow, that yeah. So when I think about dry wells specifically, there's no weight currently to pressing that button. There's no, oh my God, I've just murdered an entire town of people. But now, once you go and meet these people, I think they might be the ones who, convince you, okay, well, you might hate the Legion, but you're not just killing legionaries when you nuke this place. You're killing all the slaves and the people who are living there, who are just living under the Legion's thumb. They're just average people. So it adds a lot more complexity to that decision, and you really have to rationalize, is the evil that I'm doing by murdering hundreds or even thousands of people, is that outweighed by you know by weakening them and making them potentially lose the Mojave? So that was the initial like weight, the gamble that we wanted players to have to fight with in their head when they still decide to press that button. But yeah, when it comes to actual development, yeah, the location is very key, because especially in Fallout lore, where um, certain enemies or certain factions are only specific to certain regions, it is really important because you can't tell a story about the NCR if you want to be in Florida. It just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot to that. There's a lot you could unpack there.
We're 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 all about big brain thoughts here on the podcast. And like, yeah, because like there's other games where like the location is kind of like the first thing you think about. To just like thinking like a couple off the top of my head, like, Assassin's Creed or like
Yeah.
Grand Theft Auto. And I think because like you brought up like a really good comparison to where it's like in like fantasy games, like the story is sort of like the kind of story you want to tell is like is primary, whereas like the location where it happens is sort of secondary. I think that like especially because like there was like a game that was like teased during the Game Awards. I think it was called like Witches or something like that, where it like
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's like
I think I know what you're talking about.
it has some sort of like focus on like the magic system that it uses, but like it's based in the Dungeon and Dragons universe. And it's not like, oh, we want like this specific story to happen, like you said with like Fable, we want it to happen in this specific town or this specific place or this specific location. It's like, no, we have a specific story we want to tell, and then we can sort of like figure out where that story is going to be told in the world, as opposed to Fallout, where it's like, where is this story going to happen is the big primary thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. So to get back on on with Dry Wells and Long 15 specifically, with Long 15, to get to the story specifically, because I'm probably going out on a limb here specifically, but like the story of Long 15 seems like it might be more an evolution of what you did with Drywell. You then took that to Long 15 and were able to focus on context. I haven't played either. I have plans to play Long 15 when I get back into streaming after the holiday break. Which I'm actually probably doing right now. So you should probably go check my Twitch, maybe. But as far as the story, well, actually, just Long 15 in general, conceptually, compared to Dry Wells, how did you go? Or sorry, not how did you, but how did Long 15 sort of evolve and change and expand based on what you took the experience of creating Dry Wells?
Sure. This is also something we had to think about a lot during the early stages of Long 15. As I mentioned, Dry Wells was mostly just me, so had a lot of, I think it had a lot of good concepts there, but there was a lot of pieces that I couldn't fully flesh out because it was just my writing and my time. So any ideas, I was going to have to be the one implementing them. So it was like I can only do so much as a single person. So I decided that I wanted that to be short and sweet, and then when you finish it, you're maybe craving more. You're maybe like, well, that was great, but I really want more of that. I would rather have the player step away from that mod feeling that than saying, like, oh, there was just too much there, it was convoluted, or the location was too spread apart. Any number of those things. So I think that was successful. I think that was good. And then when moving into Long 15, had a bit more freedom to go, okay, what would that look like in a real life location? Because fun fact, Dry Wells doesn't, we have a kind of estimation of where it is, but from what the creators made, it doesn't line up with anything in the real world. So we're thinking it could be around, Havasu or a couple other little towns out there, but it doesn't look like anything real. Versus the Long 15, similarly, they added this massive overpass that doesn't exist in real life, but we know where that is. That's near Baker, California. And Baker, California has a lot of really iconic things in it, like the world's tallest thermometer. It has an alien themed jerky shop. It has a mad Greek restaurant. So it has all these really iconic locations. And we just figured, well, let's make it more real. To your point about the locations, we figured we can actually reflect New Vegas in that now we can bring in a real town, and we can build a larger team who can actually create assets and things like that, um, and tell a story. But it all has to be within the scope of the NCR. So this is not in the wasteland. This is very much under the NCR government. So you're not going to be seeing like roving bands of raiders, and people aren't going to be getting in gunfights in the middle of the street. That's just not going to happen because you're under a government rule here. Now you can, go farther out away from the road and find action, but that's not really the point of the main story. The main story is we took from old westerns, and we brought out the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then we have a secret fourth ending, which is the worst, which I've seen a few people find. So we just wanted to reflect, the good of the NCR with Colonel Roy as the main character, the bad, which is, how some people within the NCR can utilize it for horrible things, and the corruption within their government. And then you have the ugly, which is kind of a mix of the two. You've got this Brahmin baron who, you know, has done a lot of good things for the town, but he has really, really shady business practices, and he has very questionable morals. So our for Long 15 was we had a lead writer, Alaska, and he put together this really awesome story. Um, but when we were thinking about it in the, when you think about it in like chapters, so Drywell's chapter one, Long 15's chapter two, they're completely separate stories. But I think the storytelling, in how we write the characters, um, it's evident to the player because Drywell's, a character might have 30 or 40 lines, and you can learn a little bit about their backstory, learn a little bit of lore. Long 15, we put a lot more work into, if you go into this location, you can learn about how the NCR operates, what their government looks like, what a day in the life looks like for an average person there. So that was kind of our emphasis there. We did focus a lot more on the people with Long 15, where Drywell's was more about the faction, the Legion.
What were some of your inspirations? Like a lot of the things that you drew, maybe not direct reference from when creating,
Mhm.
but just like a lot of your creative inspirations for storytelling, environmental design, stuff like that. Obviously, I feel like, especially with Fallout, there's so many scenes where like, oh, this is like that scene, or like direct
Mhm.
references, like with a lot of stuff in like Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, they're like, oh, that's a Doctor Who reference, or oh, that's
Yeah.
this and
Yeah.
that. What sort of like inspirations did you pull from when designing both of these mods, Drywells and Long 15, the story
Well, I'll
and
start.
the world space creation?
Yeah, I'll start with the really fun ones. So, like with we wanted to do some cool Wild Wasteland stuff. So, we do have a phone booth, like a working actual phone booth in Long 15, and you can call people. Part of that is just to show that the NCR is like an operational. They can utilize these old phone lines that already exist, um, at least to a small degree. But what we really liked about that is we could add wackier stuff. So if you have Wild Wasteland, you do have the Doctor Who, the TARDIS sound of warping as you turn on the phone booth. When you go into the town hall, you can do like a Star Wars reference where if you want to you want to get into the town hall and get an audience with the mayor, so you can tell him like, "Oh, your thermal exhaust port is damaged," and then he's like, "Oh, well, a precise hit could blow up the town hall because it's the Death Star." And then we have uh, Jeremiah McDougal. He's one of the hunters, and instead of saying Oregonians, he says Argonians. So we did pull in a lot of fun little references for that. But for the story itself, um, we took a lot from westerns. So we love the idea of you have this one main road going down. You have the back roads, but you have this one main street, and that's where most of the action happens. Um, and we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we took a lot from there, and then we have a lot of intricacies with the police. So you have like these really in-depth uh, police like stakeout missions where you can like crack down on the local gang. Um, and that a lot was taken from The Wire. Alaska loves The Wire, so it's a really incredible TV show. So we took a lot from there. Um, just inspiration from things like that. We looked at a lot of old westerns. The sheriff is based on the sheriff from True Grit, Rooster Cogburn. For us, he's Nolan Crow. Like Crow instead of Rooster. So we did take a lot of
Because they're both
inspiration from.
birds.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Get it?
That's genius.
um, but yeah, we took a lot of media references, and I think as you play, there will be a lot that I can't even think of off the top of my head. But as far as environmental design, I actually took some inspiration for the dungeons from Fallout 4 because I think New Vegas, for all its good things, has really terrible dungeon and level design. The dungeons are usually really small. They're usually like a hallway with a room at the end, and that's basically the entire dungeon. I love the idea of how Fallout 4 has it, where you go in, you have this deep dungeon, you go deeper and deeper. It leads you to all these different secrets. You uncover, more and more about where you are. And then there's a lever on the door that could only be opened one way. And so you get a quick exit out and you don't have to backtrack through 30 minutes that you just walked through. I do enjoy the level design of that.
What's your
There's
favorite?
also
What's your favorite Fallout 4 dungeon?
Um, oh man, it's been a while since I played Fallout 4, so I would have to think exactly. But I used to love the caves where you'd go in and there'd be like raiders in the caves. I liked the one. It's actually kind of more of an outdoor dungeon. I might need help with the name of it, but there's the DLC where you basically repair a vault, and you set up a vault for this like old ghoul lady. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, that was one of the, I can't remember. I think it was the contraption DLC. I think it was just called Vault Tech, I think.
Yeah. So I actually really like the area outside of that, like right on the outside, because it's almost like this quarry. You have these giant stone blocks everywhere,
Mhm.
and then you have the raiders that have like built these shacks on top of the stone blocks, and it's like I just think the way that they did that because you have verticality is so cool. I love verticality, adding different layers. I love adding where you're fighting on the ground floor and then you have people shooting down at you from the archways above, things like that. Um, I think that adds a lot to the experience, which you just don't really see with the old play sets, like the old, exterior or interior sets in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. So I think more of that is better.
I think that makes
Um,
sense specifically because like verticality was one of the things that they like really focused on with Fallout 4.
mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of verticality in Fallout 4. I will say the gunplay and the dungeons and like the combat there is so much better in Fallout 4. It's so much more well done. Um, if I want to go shoot something, I'm not going to pick New Vegas or 3 for that because 4 is so much more well done. So we
Mhm.
tried to bring a little bit of that in. We have a couple of really huge dungeons um, in Long 15, and they've been received pretty well. I think it was my first time making like massive sprawling dungeons and taking like multiple weeks to build a dungeon. And yeah, pretty proud of some of the ones that we have. We specifically have this one, the State Road 127 tunnel, and there's a lot of verticality brought into that. So you're going down this tunnel, and then you find that a hole was blown under the tracks, and it leads underground into this like underground facility, and you have to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper until you're finally at the very end. And I really like that a lot.
I sort of feel bad every time I have to, maybe not have to, but like choose to bring it up. Because like, I don't, I'm not sure how like publicly present this is. Um, but I can like harp on and get pretty caught up in various things. I can get pretty mean sometimes, but when it I don't like bringing it up specifically because like I feel like the entire thing was already such a clusterfuck in and of itself.
Hmm.
But the frontier, and we've had TG Spy on the show before. I've talked with him
Sure.
at length offline and stuff like that. um and it's not something that I'm like, like, oh, they did bad, they should feel bad and stuff like that. And I think TG Spy knows like my feelings around the mod and stuff, because
Hmm.
especially since we've talked about it. But it can't really be overstated what a point in history the entire Frontier saga was,
Yeah.
especially for modding. So when I talk about it, I one sort of preface that like it was a thing, it happened, it sucked. But me personally, I don't like it. It happened, it sucked.
Hmm.
But for anybody that I talk to that does modding and stuff like that, I kind of always have to sort of ask, because of everything that happened with the frontier and everything, how has that sort of like shaped the way that you approached designing these mods? Because I think obviously like the mods that you put out have been, pretty separated from the time that the frontier was released. So
Hmm.
there's not really like a before and after that you can look at and compare to. Especially since you said that that Dry Wells was just you, and it sounds like it was a smaller scale. And you
Hmm.
said that Long 15 took like 15 months. So that's
Right.
also relatively a pretty small scale. Um, so again, there's no like before and after, but with everything that happened with the frontier, how did that sort of change your approach to modding, if it changed anything at all? And if it didn't change anything in how you approach, how did it sort of shape how you approach mod development?
Yeah, I definitely think Frontier is it's obviously a touchy subject for New Vegas modders. And one thing I'll also add is TG Spy is he's on our development team.
Nice.
I know most like 99% of his time is going towards the Frontier, but he did help us with a lot of like scripting things that we're maybe newer to and things like that. And he's such a talented individual. He's such a so much knowledge that he has from working on all these mods over the years. Um, and I'll also add that I'm very much looking forward to the Frontier rework project he's working on. It sounds really incredible and awesome and insanely ambitious. It is many, many times larger than Long 15, which is huge. I can't even begin to imagine how much work they've been putting into that. Um, with all that said, I do think that we had to be careful going into this because I don't think there has been a very large, like, expansion project for New Vegas since Frontier. I guess there was, New California. I don't know the exact timing of which one came out first.
It was New California was the first one, and then
Okay,
Frontier
so it came out.
several years
Yeah.
after.
Okay. Then yeah, I don't think there's been like a huge expansion. I think we might be I don't know if we're huge, but it's pretty big. We have about 20 hours of content. So that's pretty big. Um, and thinking about it, we've just had to be careful. And that's not really to the Frontier team's fault. It's more to the knee jerk reaction from the community
Mhm.
when they hear, oh, Fallout New Vegas expansion. If you've read a Reddit thread, it's just like instantly, it's like, please don't be the next Frontier, don't be the next Frontier. And it's just been beaten to death, so many times that, I mean, it's exhausting for us. I can't imagine how the Frontier rework team feels about it. I feel really terrible for them for having to endure that many years of this. But when it comes to how we, you know, presented our mod, we wanted to make sure that it was presented as lore friendly. It's presented as something that feels like an extension of New Vegas, and we wanted it to not have anything too jarring. So, unfortunately, there were writing decisions that we wanted to make that were a little bit more out there. Nothing like crazy or anything, but maybe more controversial, like politically controversial, or making the player think. We want the player, like, we never want to heavy hand something, but we do want to show them, some of the brutalities of living in the wasteland. But we cut back almost all of those ideas because it's very easy for a video or a headline to say, like, you know, mod writer puts their disguised fetish in this mod, XYZ. And I think it's really, in a lot of ways, it might be good because there are some really strange writing choices that some modders make that are very bad. But at the same time, it really hampers the creative freedom you have when you're creating a mod like this. And I can't even imagine the pressure that that team is under. But we definitely did feel that pressure making our mod. So we cut back on a lot of our ideas. We just tried to make things. We wrote things very carefully and um, in a way that's very believable, very lore friendly. We didn't want anything to be out there, and in some ways, it's frustrating because we can't write the stories that we always want to write. But um, we played the safe route, and I do think it paid off for us.
Especially when you take into consideration just sort of how almost hyper aware of like the positioning of everything
Hmm.
in the series for as as documented as the Fallout franchise is,
Yeah.
which is something that we've seen like as an ongoing thing with Fallout Prime, like the positioning of specific cities or
Oh yeah.
locations, the which way Dinky the Dino's facing, and it's like, to an extent these things do sort of have like, continuity,
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
conflictions and stuff like that. Like it's not ridiculous to say that these things are unimportant, but it is,
Hmm.
noteworthy to say that, or to point out that they have changed.
Yeah.
And also just sort of like the climate that we're in the gaming community. Like a lot of people seem to be like a lot more hypercritical of expansive nuanced storytelling that's like
Yeah.
trying to say something specific, or like, people reacting negatively when it's like, this seems like, it's woke, or like problematic, and this, that, and the other thing.
Hmm.
Obviously there are some stories and plot lines that are probably, I'm not going to say shouldn't be told, but probably aren't handled in the best of ways. Um,
Definitely.
to say the least. But like, yeah, I feel I can't imagine for mod teams or anybody who's trying to tell a story in specifically the Fallout IP, like navigating this just like landmine, like just a like miles long minefield
Hmm.
of different hurdles, just to be able to be creative and tell a story.
Well, I will say one thing that helped us, which I totally forgot about until you mentioned that, is we're totally aware of the hyper polarized political environment, and like you said, like the woke versus problematic thing, and you don't want to anger either crowd, and you want this to be it, it's definitely tough, right? It's a tough line to try and walk on, even as a official game developer, let alone a mod team, which we have no PR people, we don't have a community manager. It's just us. Um, so our approach was even though we're making the mod in 2025, um, we pulled back all of our references to 2010, which is when New Vegas was made. So all of our references were more like we were recreating kind of the Bush era, Obama era, um, like US.
Mhm.
So we weren't like making direct references, obviously, but like the references that we were making would align more with Obama or Bush or politics of that time. And I do think that helped us a lot because people just aren't going to be as emotionally charged about an issue that happened 20 years ago as they are about something that happened, during COVID, because people still feel, very actively upset about certain things.
Mhm.
So I think that helped us a lot, and that was a decision mostly made by Alaska and the rest of our team. We agreed, and when I would write, I would just try to emphasize that as well. So we just tried to put ourselves in the mindset of, a New Vegas developer in 2010 writing the dialogue, and that did help.
What is sort of like the next step in this series that you're making? You started with Dry Wells in the Legion. You moved on to Long 15 in the NCR. Both of those seem specifically to, as we talked about before, seem
Mhm.
specifically tied to, you know, a connection with the location as dependent on, um, as dependent on the original game. It's meant to. It's sort. It's. I was going to say it's sort of like with Sim Settlements 2, where
Mhm.
it's meant to enhance the original story.
Yeah.
But like Sim Settlements 2 isn't exactly that. It's meant to coincide with the events that are happening in the original story, but aren't
Mhm.
meant to like, boost it up or anything. But with the Long 15 and Dry Wells, it is intended to add a little bit more like weight or gravitas to that decision you make at the end of Lonesome Road. To that extent, you have covered two of probably the most popular factions in the series. And since this is currently a sequel, a two-piece, again, covering two of the most popular factions in the entire franchise, are there any plans to, continue on with something else? Do you have plans for,
Mhm.
a Brotherhood of Steel expansion, an expansion for, the Great Khans, or like, maybe get a little crazy and go with like the Boomers, or maybe like even like a Raider faction,
Yeah.
or anything like that? Like, is there plans to advance further into another group or another faction with this expansion, quote unquote, series that you have going on so far?
Yeah. This is obviously something that we've talked about this a lot on the
My
team
basic
already.
question is, when
Um,
is the Followers of the Apocalypse expansion going to happen? Come on, that's
um,
all I care about. No, but yeah, what like,
yeah.
yeah.
It's a fair question. So funny enough, when I first started making mods in 2012, 2013, that's what I first focused on was faction reworks. So I did Factions Reloaded series, and those are quite a bit more rough around the edges because they were made by a 13-year-old. So I did what I could at the time, but I have one for the Legion, one for the Raiders, one for the Followers of the Apocalypse. Um, Now, funny enough, Drywells and Long 15 were decided on by a poll in our Discord. So the poll was, what do folks want to see next? Great Cons Reloaded for the Factions Reloaded series, Drywells, Long 15, or something else. And Drywells was the number one pick, Long 15 was number two, and then Great Cons Reloaded was number three. So now that we're like done with all this, first, the team is going to take a well-deserved break for a while first and just relax,
Yeah.
and then I think what we'll do next is um, try to decide what the next project looks like for us. So we've talked about Great Cons. That's a very interesting one because there's a lot of mentions of the Great Cons, or like little things that happen with that faction that aren't really explored. Like when you convince them to go to Wyoming and stuff, you don't really see any of that. And that could be really cool. There could be interactions with other tribes to the west. There could be, Bitter Springs could be more fleshed out. So that's a big consideration for us. The other consideration is doing a similar world space style mod, but going farther away. So we've talked about like Texas, like East Texas, going to Midland or Lubbock or one of those areas, like kind of exploring new factions and a little bit of, you'd be far enough away that you'd hear rumors of this distant legion that's killing people, but you wouldn't actually see it. You could just see kind of the wake of, refugees escaping east. So there's a lot of directions we could take, but I think those are our two competing ones right now: Great Cons or something in Texas.
You heard it here first and foremost. Fallout Montana coming out December 2026. Toxic Whiteout. There's going to be 50 factions. You're going to be able to play as 40 different races, 300 endings. Get excited.
And we need your help, so come make it for us.
Right? Yeah. Now you got something to live up for. You better get to work. But no, that it's especially, I think the most logical thing probably, especially for New Vegas, because, obviously some of the more popular factions, maybe not more popular, but like some of the more like fan favorites or like, the Enclave or the Brotherhood or anything like that. But like they aren't as present in New Vegas, but the cons are such like, they're such an interesting faction, and they're like right there, like those sort of like smaller factions, like, the Followers of the Apocalypse, the Cons, even like, the Bright Followers and stuff are interesting. And it seems like there's maybe not, well, actually maybe the Bright Followers, because, they do blast off into space and stuff. But like there's so many like interesting and unique factions in New Vegas specifically that could be expanded upon. And I think out of all of them, the Cons are definitely the most interesting ones. And again, given the poll that you ran, obviously the most popular ones. Especially since they sort of like straddle that line between like straight up raider group and like, more so atypical factions, like they're not 100% like just like psychopaths, but they are definitely like rougher around the edges compared to like the Brotherhood or the NCR.
It's something I wish we got with the Gunners in Fallout 4. I think like that was such a missed opportunity to make them like really interesting and maybe not be a main, quest faction, but just give us a little more on who these people are, what their goals are, things like that.
Especially since there's like a lot of implications of their background, like with like their, and I don't know if any of this has been like confirmed outright, but the going theory is that they were like child soldiers who, were trained and grew up in one of the vaults. I can't remember which number it is.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Cause I can't remember what the number is, but there's this one vault, where you go down into, and, you're going through the vault. And I think, it is a gunner. It is a gunner hideout. And there's like, child's play equipment. And as you're going through, you slowly learn that the children that were kept in this vault were trained as child soldiers. And then I think through like notes and stuff, you learn that like 2 of them planned an escape and stuff. And then like were actually able to escape, I think. It's been a while, so this is mostly like rough recollection, but like I think the going fan theory is that the Gunners are like the grown up versions of the children that escaped from that vault. Which that's just a theory, a Fallout theory. But like it's definitely, I think it definitely has some legs behind it, but it does, if nothing else, is a good example of Fallout's or of Bethesda's, environmental storytelling. But like, fuck, that would have been cool as like an actual fleshed out, like pseudo faction in a sense.
Yeah, totally agree. And that was one of the I think that's one of the things that makes Fallout New Vegas have this like cult like following is, even the minor factions like that have these stories. And even if they're not as fleshed out as we'd like them to be, they're pretty interesting and they leave you wanting more, wanting to learn more. So yeah, I think cons would be really, really interesting to explore.
Speaking of both Fallout New Vegas and the cons, let's talk about Fallout Prime. Thoughts, feelings, opinions, Frankenstein sense?
I think mixed feelings. I don't hate the show. I think a lot of people are like really upset. Some people really love it. I think, like I said, off before we started talking on like being recorded,
Mhm.
I mentioned that I think it's great that the show is bringing so many new people to all of the games, not just the new one. I think that's really awesome. My concern with the show right now is I get a little bit of the feeling that all the choices I make in New Vegas are now kind of moot because the factions are a lot more like broken down and they're all seems like they're all doing poorly, which is kind of sad. I was really I will say the only thing I really did not like, and I did like that the Legion broke apart and they're having this
So
big
this
civil
is
war. I
spoilers, by the way.
Oh,
Obviously,
sorry,
there's probably
sorry.
there's probably a
Yeah,
thing that popped up. I mean,
probably
by
pop up.
the
Yeah.
point that the episode actually comes out, we'll be talking about the next episode. But in general, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
probably put like
Sorry
a
about that.
descriptor up, but yeah, yeah, the Legion technically split into two different factions that are both calling themselves the Legion. I actually high key loved that decision because
I like that a lot. Yeah.
it plays to both of both the Legion's biggest strength and their biggest weakness. Their biggest strength
Mhm.
being is that they are determined. If they set out to do something, they will do it and they will not stop until it's done. Because the
Yeah.
basis of their separation is that Caesar died, whether or not his body was moved from the location where it currently is, which very likely wasn't the case. He just kind of died on the spot, and they built
Mhm.
around him. He died, and he wrote down the name of his successor on a note and put it in his divine pocket. And for the last 20 years, the Legion has just been like at a complete standstill, fighting over who gets to look into his pocket and read this note, which is just like the most Fallout thing possible. Like, this faction is at war with itself over who gets the privilege to read a note in a dead man's pocket. Like, that's so funny. And it also feeds on the Legion's biggest weakness, which is because they're sort of like a cult, because they are a cult of personality, they can't allow somebody to be like the bigger personality, right? Like, that's why they have two Caesars and they're both claiming to be like the true successor. But like, I just I just really love that because it's such a good bit of writing. I know there's people out there that like vehemently are going to disagree with that, but I think that's just hilarious, and I think that's just so peak Fallout. That specifically. But yeah, like as you were saying, there are a lot of people that have sort of like mixed feelings about the series in general.
Yeah. I think the way I feel is the decisions they're making are overall good, but I think my critique, if I was, able to like, magic hand wave over everything,
Yeah.
is I would just maybe tone down the absurdity of it just a little bit. And that's just my personal preference. I think for folks who really enjoy the humor and the wackiness, they're gonna like it a lot more than me. But I think, for example, what you're saying about the Legion, totally agree. I think it's a great idea that they should split apart, have this own civil war, have multiple factions within the Legion calling themselves Caesar and being the rightful owner. All of that I think is very true. I think the part that I really did not like is that the hill is maybe like 6 feet tall, and
Oh yeah, that was
you
kind of
could pretty
weird.
much just you could just kind of run up and grab the note and run back down if you were really determined. So like the 15-year thing made me like, well, come on, like this is okay. I get what they're doing, but like, it was so absurd. It was like totally absurd. You could like see over the hill. The Both Caesars were like completely open to, like, you could just throw a grenade over the little lump and kill the Caesar. Um, I think if they just took a little more like if they just it's a hard line, right? Because if they start appeasing certain Fallout fans, it'll never be enough, right? So you can't appease everybody. But I think things like maybe making that no man's land like a mile long and having two camps on multiple sides of this battleground,
Hmm.
I think that would have done a lot. But to the their point, I mean, it's a show. There's only so much they can do. But I did really like that they broke apart the Legion. I'm not a huge fan of what they're doing to the NCR. I think it would have been more interesting to show them as like bloated with a lot of manpower, but everything's failing. Maybe the logistics are all failing because the capital's failed. Capital's been destroyed. Um, Showing like these lots of deserters, like people leaving because they're not getting food or not getting paid. Things like that would have been interesting. I think it's sad to see that there's only a few of them left, but we're only three episodes in. There could be, the captain spoke about like some battalion out east. There could be more. We could learn more.
Yeah, and
So
and
yeah,
specifically with it being compared to the first season where it was like all put out
yeah,
at once. With season 2, they're doing it, on a weekly basis. So there's like it, and this is mostly like theory crafting on my part. There seems to be moments that are going to be coming down the pipeline that we're either
yep,
not aware of or just like can't fully confirm. So one of the things that we can say probably with more certainty is that the Macaulay Culkin's Legion side is going to like win out in that little skirmish that they got going on, because
hmm
there's a scene that plays in one of the trailers where he's sort of like, raising his sword and like to battle. And we can actually see on his head the same, leaf crown that the two Caesars are wearing. So very likely what happened is that skirmish happened. His side won. He goes up to read the note, probably because, their Caesar died. And this is more so my theory. I've seen a lot of people on like Reddit say that like, oh, the notes not just Reddit, but like the comments in general. I've seen people saying like the note probably says like, there is no other Caesar. I'm the only
yeah,
Caesar. But Macaulay Culkin's character is going to read that and be like, I'm not going to fucking tell anyone what this says. I'm going to just say it was me. And then like, he's going to like, let's go. And then they're going to like point back towards Vegas. Cause like I said, they are determined. If they're like, this was Caesar's plan, we need to, like, and then he's just going to like craft from there. Like, oh, this is Caesar's divine will. And just like claim that like ad nauseum
yeah,
to do whatever he wants. And then I think there was, because one of the other going theories is that because Maximus seems like he's becoming like more and more disillusioned with the Brotherhood, comparing them to what he used to think they are, to realizing like what
yeah,
they actually are, especially with the whole stuff at the end of episode 3 with Harkness almost killing those children. I've seen some people theorize that he's probably going to, especially since we see him later on in like the trailers and stuff, in power armor that's designed more so in like an NCR fashion. Some people have been theorizing that like he's going to, leave the Brotherhood and then maybe is going to join up with like the remnants of the NCR and help to like rebuild the faction, which for his character, makes sense since he's a
yeah,
former NCR citizen and went out into the wasteland to try to become like, a great man and a hero and stuff like that, but then just sees how fucked up everything is and is like, you know what? Let's give this whole democracy thing another swing.
I was gonna say I love Maximus's character arc so far. That's one area where they've totally won me over. Is Maximus is so interesting, and seeing him, like you said, become disillusioned with the Brotherhood and kind of start looking for a way out. I think going, with what was his name, Xander. That
Yeah.
was kind of he was looking for a way out, and he found very quickly that that was not it. The Commonwealth Brotherhood was not what he was looking for. So I totally agree with you. I agree with that theory that he's probably going to join the NCR. And I would say that's a direction I would like. I would like that. And he's probably, him and the Ghoul are my two most, like, the two parts of the show that I like the most. I think they're both such interesting characters.
I like I mean, yeah, I kind of like all three for like different reasons, which I feel like
Yeah.
hot take. But yeah, I think because there's the concept that all three sort of like represent three different versions of like Fallout player.
They're the good,
Lucy,
bad, and the ugly.
yeah. Lucy's the good, Maximus is
Yeah,
the bad, and the Ghoul is the ugly.
definitely.
In like varying degrees of like willingness to do violent things or to like do what's necessary. And I think I would probably rank Maximus higher than the Ghoul, because while I think the Ghoul sort of like the Ghoul's just there to like aura farm and be badass, like hands down. But I think it's a lot more impressive, or maybe interesting rather, to see Maximus's character journey, because like, when the Ghoul catches a body, it's just another Tuesday. But when Maximus catches a body, it's like a thing, right? And it's just like, it just shows like, oh, he's becoming, maybe I'm just seeing too many like Maximus edits on TikTok, but it's like his kills are always like a lot more like, oh, whereas the Ghoul is like, yeah, he killed that guy.
Yeah, very true. And the Ghoul, it feels like a lot of his character arc. I mean, I'm sure he's still doing some growing, but it seems like a lot of it already happened. Whereas Lucy's like early in her character development. She definitely changed a lot at season one. Seems like she's kind of reverted back to being very good, like save everyone type of thing in season two. And I'm wondering if she's gonna go back towards, like, is the wasteland gonna break her? That is a really interesting question I've been thinking about too.
One of the like really early theories I had with the series, like before the first season came out, sort of like relied on like what sort of relationship the Ghoul and Lucy are going to have. Because even in like the first series, it was very clear that they were going to have some sort of back and forth dynamic. And one of the things that I theorized, and this was before any of the episodes came out and we were still trying to figure out the story. One of the things that I was sort of thinking and theory crafting in my little Cro-Magnon noodle here, was that it seemed as if the plot line was going to be like, Cooper Howard survives the war. He becomes the Ghoul, so he's obviously been around forever. But he and his daughter go hide somewhere. They survive the nukes, and then, story. They knock around the wasteland for a little bit, and then she dies through one form or another. Whether it's like early on or like she grows up. Not until, adulthood and stuff like that, but, dies in some sort of like tragic way that's like unnatural. And then the Ghoul becomes more bitter and more hardened because, the wasteland took his kid and stuff like that. And he becomes more jaded. And then he sees Lucy, somebody who's brand new to all of this, come out and is like the same level of naive and stuff. And like that pisses him off because it reminds him of his daughter and stuff. But then he slowly starts to, build a connection, a relationship with her. And then is like, you know what, even though this kid's fucking stupid as hell, her heart's in the right place. And like, maybe she's right. And, could like, and this is something that we see sort of begin to happen with the Ghoul's character at the end of episode 3, where
he very clearly could have just like, there's no real point in me helping Lucy. She's on a cross with the Legion. That's a bummer. But because she's constantly talking about like, the golden rule and being a better person and stuff like that, it now seems like he's starting to be like, okay, you know what? Maybe she's got a point. Maybe I should like, be doing what I can to keep her around so she can continue to do the right thing and I can be, convinced, I guess, to do the right thing. And I think that because I don't really feel like the Ghoul is going to be around for like the entire runtime of the series, which I think from bits and pieces we've got is going to be like, anywhere between like 7 to 9 seasons, I think, maybe a little bit less, but I don't think he's going to be around forever, especially since it seems like his character arc is probably going to wrap up in maybe like the next season or two. So I think a big part of his character is sort of like being like the reflection of, like you said, the ugly, and then sort of trying to like redeem himself a little bit and also be sort of a like a guide for Lucy to sort of like represent like, hey, this is like the worst of the worst, but if you like really stick to your guns, then you can actually make a difference, and you can, not let the wasteland change you in the same way that it changed me.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I think with his arc, it's like we're seeing little bits and pieces of his old self here and there, but then it'll flash back to a memory of like him getting betrayed or him, betrayed by his own wife, or like his worldview being crushed, when he was before he was a ghoul. And it's like it's a big question. You can, is that going to win out and he's going to make some big decision that, you know, hurts Lucy or the others, or is he going to give up his quest for revenge, to possibly become a better person? Like we don't know what's going to happen. And I'm really curious to see what happens and how he confronts specifically his wife when he like if he meets her again, because that's the current quest, right? He's looking for her.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm very curious to see how that goes. Um, it's yeah, like you said, I think his arc is probably going to wrap up in the next season or two, but um, I just find it to be very interesting and compelling because it's the one glimpse of before that we actually get, before the bombs fell. And I'm really curious to see where the showrunners take that, like where they decide to go with that.
What sort of direction would you want the story to go in? I'm not 100% sure if this actually is going to be the case, but so far into season 2, both of the seasons have taken place in like different locations in the United States. I think there's some sort of teasing that the Commonwealth might be a future location. If not season 3, which I very strongly doubt it would be season 3, but maybe a future season later on down the line. But as far as like the future of the series, where would you want to see them go in like, especially since we've talked previously about like the location in Fallout sort of being like the main focus,
Yeah.
and then story coming after that. How would you want to see the story advance? If we go somewhere else, where would you want the story to go? And just like, just that, if you could either like, theory craft as to where the story's going or had creative control, where would you take the take Fallout Prime?
As far as where I think it's going, I don't know if I could even really tell you. I think it's first going to go to House. All roads are going to go to House, but then I don't know where they're going to go from there. Like you said, the Commonwealth. I think, like you said, eventually they'll want to go there, but it's just such a long journey that I think unless they get a hold of one of those airships or something, there's a good chance they're going to have to go somewhere else first. I I've always wanted to see the Texas Triangle and how that could play out. Dallas, Austin, Houston, maybe even San Antonio. It'd be really cool to see what's going on there because we have no idea, and it's right in the middle of the United States, and we just don't have a lot of knowledge. Um, so if I could, ask the showrunners, I would say show us something new that we don't know about yet. Like obviously, go through these areas, give us, you know, a new look at the areas that we played in New Vegas and Fallout 1 and 2, and show us what's going on there. But then move on to something we haven't seen before, because I think it's really cool to see the Commonwealth. It's really cool to see New Vegas, but I would really like to see um, something something. I want the show to expand upon it. And at one point, Todd said that the show should be treated as Fallout 5. I think it was an older interview. Um, so if that's the case, I'd really like to see them bring about something completely new, like a new faction or two, a new government somewhere that's like lurking in the shadows, not just the Enclave and the Brotherhood. They're cool, but I want to see what other cities are up to.
What if this is how we get Fallout Tactics canonized, or this is how we get to see this is how we go. This is how we get to see Fallout New Orleans.
I would take New Orleans too. That would be really cool.
Right.
Some gators.
If we're talking about like pre-existing lore, especially considering the fact that we're in Vegas right now, and if the way the wind is blowing, it seems like we might be like going slower and like more and more eastward. I think it'd be a real great opportunity to explore like, the divide and like, tinker with like the idea of the Midwest Brotherhood and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
If we're getting like lore specific instead of like, spinning off and creating something new like Fallout Great Lakes or Fallout New Orleans, I think that would probably be like the next logical location, unless they focused on something like we were talking about earlier with like the Great Khans going up into Montana, especially since they've now referenced the Khans twice in season 2, most likely just because they're a big, important, noteworthy faction in New Vegas. But I think that would be an interesting direction for them to go to explore more of the tribal aspects of the series.
That would be cool. Yeah, that would be really cool.
Especially since like it could just be me, but like I love tribal aspects in the Fallout series because they have such a unique twist to them. I forget the name. I forget the name of the faction. I think it was a tribe that was going to be in like Van Buren, but they're like really focused around like mathematics and like calculus, I think. And all of their names are sort of like derived from sort of like different, math based, terminology and stuff like that. God, I wish I could remember because they're such an interesting group, just in the way they're designed. And I think Fallout really lends itself well to that sort of tribal design, because I mean, especially with relation to like Caesar's Legion with like the Twisted Hares and the Sun Dogs and like all those like individual tribes that they absorbed. I think there's just such crazy awesome potential, not specifically for like like tribal in like the Fallout 2 sense, to where like they're living in huts and caves and bridges made out of wood and stuff, but those smaller groups that are like, we're not trying to shape history or anything. We're just trying to, survive.
Yeah, I think the tribal thing is so interesting, and that's one of the reasons why so many fans keep returning to Van Buren, because it's always like what could have been or what almost was, and there's a lot of ideas there that um, people are just still obsessed with to this day. And I think for good reason. Each tribe can have a different identity and a different conflict and different, like, you can when you're thinking about storytelling, it's like each one is a clean slate. Each one you can give such a unique personality that it would be really awesome to see that explored in the show. I just don't know how long they could do it because, how interesting can you make it if it's just all these, tribes living in the middle of the woods somewhere? Um, I think you can do it for like a season and then move on, which I think would be the best way to approach it. Just
Yeah.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
give a lot of new flavors, show a lot of these factions we've maybe heard about but never seen. I think that would be a great way to do it.
Especially since they all sort of have to have some sort of relation to the character arc of the main characters. Like
Yeah.
I've said it before. Like I think one of the only reasons the Brotherhood exists at all in the series, obviously, not the reason, because like they're arguably the most visually popular faction. They've been in practically every single Fallout game, both existing and canceled,
Yeah, exactly.
in some form or fashion. So it's like they're definitely a big driver of the series. But as far as it relates to Fallout Prime, specifically, like the story, like they only exist as like the backdrop for Maximus and his character arc.
Mhm.
In my opinion, anyway. But it does seem like if we were going to like introduce new groups of people or new settings, as opposed to like how it exists in the video games, where they can just like be places and locations that the player
Yeah.
engages with. They sort of have to have some sort of narrative relevance to the story that the main characters are going on. And yeah, I think that more so than anything, I think that's the crux of how we're going to approach like future stories in Fallout Prime.
Yeah. Yeah, very well said. And with a game, you can kind of create the story for these tribes, but or these, wherever they end up going. But for this, I see a lot of folks saying, "Well, bring them to Chicago, show them to Chicago, pull them into Chicago," but they have to have a reason to go there.
Mhm.
So I'm sure the writers could write something up, and they could go find, some other thing. What was the first season? Cold Fusion. They could do something similar, or have Hank McClane. I think that's his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hank out in some city somewhere, and they could go find him. But it it's going to have to advance their story somehow. And
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the writer because I wouldn't exactly know how to do that. But I'm interested to see where it goes for sure.
Right. Because like movies and video games are incredibly separate sorts of storytelling vehicles.
Hmm.
Like they definitely learn from each other, but they have such different relationships with the audience and the player. They're two completely different entities, and going about approaching storytelling for each of them is wildly different. Which from, I mean, as writers both, storytellers both, we could sit here for hours and talk about that. As far as like you specifically, like your next steps, and what you got looking forward to in the future. I mean, especially since, because we talked about that. You talked about potentially making an expansion mod for like the Great Khans and stuff like that, and maybe some other factions later on. Who knows? I don't, because didn't ask that. But again, cons sound super interesting. As far as like future endeavors for like, other, mods separate from this, or like modding for other games and stuff. Cause I think you mentioned during our conversation, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. You have a couple of other mods for other games. I think it was Fallout for the weightless junk mod for Fallout 4, which is still technically your most popular mod.
Almost 1 million downloads.
It's so funny.
Yeah. It's hilarious. I've put so much work into some of these mods, and like you were saying, you put so much work into something, and then the fans want what the fans want. So
Yeah,
If
they
they want
really
weightless
do.
junk, they can have it. Yeah.
But like, yeah, you have a couple other games under your belt. A little bit of modding for Fallout 4, a little bit of modding for Starfield. What is like the outside of Fallout New Vegas and the expansion mods that you got working on? What are like other areas that you're looking to explore with modding, with storytelling? This, that, and the other thing. Besides Vegas and the expansion mods, what
Sure.
is your projection looking towards?
Well, I do enjoy Fallout 4, and I would love to make some mods for it. But I think the biggest thing holding me back is you kind of have to work around that voice protagonist, or alternatively, you have to work around the mods that disable the voice protagonist, and that's
Mhm.
also controversial because it's a huge part of the game. Um, so that's really the main reason why I haven't made quest mods for Fallout 4 is just because of that. You have to like account for the number of lines that were already written and the voice lines and all that stuff. Um, so after playing Fallout 4, I messed around with it a little bit, realized, I don't know if I can make quest mods for this that I would be interested in. So I'll wait for Fallout 5. And I have been waiting for 10 years. So we'll see.
Right.
I definitely think as soon as Fallout 5 comes out, or even maybe Elder Scrolls 6, because I know that's sooner, I may transition my work there because I would love to work with a newer engine. Um, as much as I love New Vegas, it is so dated and there's so many limitations to the things you can do because um, a lot of times, like even something like setting up a conversation between two NPCs often just doesn't work. And when I was playing Fallout 3, I was just doing some Tale of Two Wastelands this morning, and I was very easily able to break a lot of the scripted sequences. I was just messing around. And I was like, I wonder if I could get this guy to break his sentence right in the middle of it. And I was like, oh, yep, I sure can. Um, Realizing that makes me just feel like I want something a little bit newer to work on. So maybe Elder Scrolls 6, maybe Fallout 5. It's just going to depend. I was very interested in making stuff for Starfield, but I think that game just didn't quite capture me narratively that the way I wanted. I thought the world, hot take. I actually thought it was really interesting setting. I really liked the idea of Bethesda going into a completely separate series and I'm a big fan of like Mass Effect and stuff, so I was really, really interested in Starfield. Um, but I just felt like it didn't quite capture me. I think the main issue that turned me off, which is very different from most people's, is that you can do the main story for a quest line and or for a faction, and then go do another main story for a different faction that's like opposed to them. So
Yeah.
I think that was one thing that I was like, I wish they didn't do that." But I mean, that would have been an easy fix. Um, I heard there's some big updates coming down the pipeline for that, so um, I'll just see. But I think Elder Scrolls 6 or Fallout 5, I think that's what I'll work on next. I don't really have a ton of interest in working on um, like I love Baldur's Gate, I love games like Cyberpunk, I love The Witcher, but I just don't know if the modding tools there are as fleshed out as they are for Bethesda. I don't know if it's really possible to make like entire quests and new lands and expansions. So I guess we'll see what Bethesda's up to next, and I'd like to be a part of it though for sure.
I know that the toolkit for Baldur's Gate 3 is like getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
But like it, because there's conversations in the Fallout fandom all the time around like, oh, blah, 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 or blah, 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 Bethesda, blah, blah, blah,
Hmm.
blah, that kind of conversation. But like it
Hmm.
really is just like completely insane just how like in depth and like powerfully, like almost like obsessively mod focused
Yeah.
like Bethesda's games have become. Like I feel like that's one of the things that Starfield maybe leaned a little bit too heavily into. It's just like how moddable the world space is, because like Starfield specifically definitely feels like it was something where it's like, oh, this is a game where we can, like, obviously there's like the story and the setting and the design and the environments and stuff like that, but it definitely feels like Starfield is like the quintessential like infinite modding possibilities, especially since it's like all those like 1,000 different planets, and there's like infinite different like locations you can drop into on each of those planets, and
it's the ultimate sandbox.
Yep. And it's just like some people would argue that like they leaned too heavily into that and sacrificed like story or like unique design and stuff like that, like locations, and it's like I'd probably say the same thing, but like it's crazy how like without even realizing it, Bethesda games are sort of like the measuring stick when it comes to modability. Because like outside of Bethesda games, like, maybe like definitely some smaller games like, oh God, I want to say Stellaris, but I don't think that's the right one. God, which one is it? I can't remember, but like there's definitely like a lot of smaller games that have like much more like robust and detailed modding capabilities. But like there's not a whole lot of games that allow you to like customize and mod, like not a whole lot of franchises that allow you to customize and mod their games quite like Bethesda. And it's crazy. And I think that especially with like the toolkits, like going from like, Fallout New Vegas into Starfield and stuff, they just, at least from what I've heard, they've just gotten like better and better and better, like easier to use and whatnot. So it's like, it's always like for the next game, like, oh man, like what are they going to do? What are they going to, give modders to work with and play with and stuff. And I think that's just really cool. And it, because it always results in just like fantastic works and like fantastic people making fantastic products. And I just love to see it. You love to see it.
You really do. It's just, step one, they have to make it compelling enough to get us to want to make it better. And I believe in them. I think they can do it. I just know that these things take time, especially when the projects are as massive as they are. I am one of the few people who actually thinks they should not keep trying to make the world spaces bigger and, add 200 hours of content and all this stuff. I think it would be better to have maybe 50 hours of content or, maybe 100 and, maybe a smaller map, and then maybe they could make a game every 2 to 3 years. I think that would be ideal, but I understand, the fans want what the fans want, and if the fans want this massive 500-hour, map, and each game has to be bigger than the last one, it's a tremendous amount of pressure. And I wish Bethesda the best, but I'm glad I'm not in their shoes at the moment. That would be really hard to meet those expectations.
So that's actually something that you bring that up, and I think that's actually something interesting because I think I know what you're driving at. That I think you've also seen that article where Emil is all like, we want to have like the next big game, we want to have like 500 hours into it. I think that's really interesting because I more so read that as like not that like they want the story or like the quests and all that stuff to equate like 500 hours worth of, like playtime, but more so like it's a game that you can like constantly come back to because it like the gameplay is so compelling, or like the character writing or like the RPG stuff is like that good. Like, I mean, I can't think of like what the exact percentage is right now, but I have like multiple friends who like have played Baldur's Gate 3. And I think this is actually like a community standard. But like there is such a low percentage, and like anybody in the comment section is definitely going to correct me, but like there is such a low completion rate for like the entire story of Baldur's Gate 3, because it's like it could just be maybe me because I'm like obsessed with like min-maxing and character design and stuff like that. But it's like you play it and then it's like, oh, this is really interesting. So you go back and you make a new character and you play as them for a little while, and then like, oh wait, this would be really cool. And then you go back and you do it. And it's just that repetition of that. Um, but like
Yeah.
with the sort of, I mean, my interpretation of that whole like 500-hour playtime stuff, that read more as like, you know, shipbuilding in Starfield, you know, being able to build and design your own ship, settlement building in Fallout 4, you know, the adventure quality and aspect, like home renovate, maybe not renovation, but like, you know, like home life from Skyrim, where you can get married and then like adopt kids and stuff like that, like making enough mechanics to where it's a world space that you want to exist in for longer, and there's things in there that are engaging enough to want to keep somebody in that world for longer. So like, you know, like playing Caravan or going to the casinos in New Vegas, like that's a system that keeps you coming back because it's a fun, engaging system to be a part of. Or like, you know, settlement building in Fallout, or not settlement building, camp building in Fallout 76, because there's just so many design aspects that you can, that's like an entire genre of the Fallout community in general, is just camp builds. And all the like crazy unique stuff that you can do with it. And I think in my mind anyway, I think that that's the right direction for Bethesda to go, because me personally, I don't think their main quests are ever really like super good. Like they're good. They're definitely good, but they're not like, you know, they're not like transcending in a sense. They can definitely be incredibly memorable, like Skyrim or Fallout 3 or New Vegas, and, you know, on and on and on. But I think the parts where they really shine is that system focus and that environmental focus. And I think if we are talking about like, you know, 500 plus hours of playtime, that's probably where I would like to see them focus most of trying to get that 500 hours, is that sort of, you know, the mechanisms that you can play with in the world spaces.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. One thing I was thinking about too is I think with Fallout 4 specifically, like to your point, a lot of people just do the settlement. There's people who have never finished Fallout 4 but have thousands of hours building towns and stuff, and that's crazy. That goes to show how successful of a system they built with that, with their, you know, settlements. Um, but I'm also thinking a little bit about, you know, for example, I think it was last week, they were trying to estimate the number of trees in Skyrim, and Todd like confirmed there's more trees in Elder Scrolls
Yeah.
6 than in Skyrim, and everyone was like, "Oh, it's gonna be so big, it's gonna be so huge," and yeah, so I definitely agree with you that you know, focus on systems and to create, you know, these experiences where the player can go in for hours and hours and hours and have all this replayability. That is really important. Um, but I do think that the main story has to be compelling enough
Mhm.
to keep people there, in order to make them want to mod it, to keep building it 10 years, 15 years after it comes out. So for Fallout 4, for example, very successful game, thousands and thousands of mods still come out for it all the time.
Mhm.
But if you look at what those mods are, it's usually like guns, retextures, expansions to the systems, more settlement building. So it's a lot of expansions upon what they did well, rather than corrections for, you know, the main story or the quests.
Mhm.
Where I think if they had a little bit more engaging main story with, you know, a few more like choices and consequences, because there's plenty of choices in Fallout 4. I just think having more impactful consequences, you'd end up with, um, you know, modding community a little more like ravenous to keep adding on to that story and expanding upon the factions that exist. But that's just my personal perspective. You know, I could definitely be wrong.
I mean, I would probably agree with that. Like the main story, like shorter and sweeter.
Yeah.
With a, you know, really condense that, because that's almost what it feels like what Starfield did, right? They tried to like make a more focused narrative that was shorter, but because of the whole Unity aspect, you can just like wrap back into itself. And then like there's all like in theory anyway, there's all these other systems that that the player can engage with while, going through the short and sweet storyline.
Yeah, it's technically endless.
Yeah, technically, yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll see what Elder Scrolls 6 and Fallout 5 like how they develop. Watch Elder Scrolls 6 come out, and there's exactly one more tree than in Skyrim. Like, he lied
if you
to us.
want,
Like,
I'll go
no.
count it. Once the creation kit comes out, I'll count it.
Right.
Make a good video. You could make a good video about that.
the top mod, it's just one specific tree, like the one extra tree. Going into, especially since we're in a new year and stuff, everything that we saw and went through in 2025, and then everything that is just like projected to continue or to like become like a thing in 2026. Looking forward into like the new year, what are you like, hoping for? What are you concerned about? What are you expecting? What is going progressing into the future? What do you see in front of us, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, I definitely think that it's been a hard year for game studios specifically. I think there's been a lot of layoffs. There's been a lot of controversy with AI lately. I know that's been the big hot topic. Um, I think that's going to continue. If anything, I think that's going to escalate. Maybe not, hopefully not the layoffs side, but the AI for sure. I think is going to continue to be a big debate. I think what's going to win out eventually is going to be, kind of the Larian point of view, where it's like people are going to use it for concept art. People are going to use it as like, to bounce ideas off of. And, you know, it comes down to like, we don't want it to replace anybody. But realistically, I think these tools are going to continue to develop. So that's something that I'm really curious to see how it continues to develop. I certainly hope that game studios don't take the lazy route and start like replacing voice actors or artists and stuff. I really hope that does not happen.
Like, you're talking about like
Um,
AI and stuff.
yeah, like replacing them with artificial intelligence to just be like, and we're seeing a little bit of it already with like, the new Call of Duties and stuff. They're coming under fire. I'm really hoping that they listen to the fan pushback. I think indie games are just going to continue exploding. I think they've been doing so well lately, and I just think they have these smaller core teams that listen to fan feedback more than the big corporations do right now. Um, I think the way of the future for video games and yeah, just video games in general, I think is like uh, making a really interesting good game that isn't like a massive slog to get through. And that could be me because as I'm getting older, I have less and less time to play video games. But I'm hoping that this year, and I am kind of foreseeing this too. I'm predicting that game studios start coming out with more, maybe $30 to $40 titles that are like Expedition 33 style. Um, I think a lot of studios are going to try and duplicate that success where maybe it's not a 100-hour behemoth of a game. Maybe it's not a GTA 6 or a Red Dead 3 or something, but it's interesting, it's fun, it's, grips you for 8 to 10 hours. Maybe it has replayability to let you play it more. Um, but like a medium-sized game that's really, really good. I hope more studios try to do that because with development cycles getting longer and longer, I think if we want to continue seeing games this year, I think they're going to have to be realistic about how big these games can get. Um, I don't think we'll see much from Bethesda this year. I think maybe 2027 we'll start seeing more from them. I know they have a lot in the works, but it sounds like they're all early on. Um, I've heard that there's maybe multiple Fallout projects that they're at least in works of talking about, which I'm assuming is that Fallout 3 potential remaster and Fallout 5. But it's all up in the air. We don't really know. I'm just gonna hope for the best and um, hope they're interesting and hope they're moddable.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with ToxicWhiteout, developer of Long 15, an NCR expansion mod for Fallout New Vegas. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow to be notified of future episodes, and consider subscribing to our Patreon for early access to new uploads to help keep episodes ad-free and to improve the quality and frequency of transmission. Until next time, dear listener, I thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all out there in the wasteland.